Thank you. I don't normally talk that much about what I do and who I am and all of that sort of thing, so it's good to hear, I guess. And, and this is the speech, but forgive me, most of it is a list of what they did this year. So I'm proposing that I'll talk for a few minutes, yammer on, and then we'll take questions, make it more of a conversation so that it'll be more fun than listening to me recite what they did this year. And I say that because usually these speeches are based on a session that narrowed and focused down to one issue. We had the tort reform session, we had the cockfighting session, if you recall, a few years, and it's so much more fun to talk about cockfighting. But this year we had a lot more. There was altercations on the House floor. There was considerable racial tension throughout the entire Capitol. There was hardline partisanship, and yet the legislature tackled a number of major issues that had been kicked down the road for years. And they just talked about those things but skirted a lot of the very partisan issues that have held up state assemblies across the country. The primary, part of it was the fiscal session, which meant that they only had 5 bills that they could do that did not have to do with the fiscals. And part of it had to do with the pandemic, which sort of shortened last year's session, gave them more time to focus in on what happened this time. But I think that there are 2 main reasons. One of them is money. And I think for the first time since 2008, the legislators came to Baton Rouge without having to face some major issues, without having to vote on taxes, without having to vote on cutting services. This time I was talking to Randall Gaines, one of the representatives, and he said, it's money. That's the reason. It's the money. Once we have the money taken care of, then it's just like in your house where the money's taken care of. Let's move on to the stuff that we've been putting off for a long time. And they did. They overcame an awful lot of this and ended up with a lot of bipartisan solutions over time. The other reason I think is leadership in the House and in the Senate, the leadership and on the 4th floor, the leadership was practical. Let's not get taught into these fights. Let's get some sort of bipartisan solutions to these problems. And so that, I think, is what came out, and that's why we have a very long list. So bear with me. I'll go through it as quick as I can, and then we'll take questions on it. So basically, I guess the lead item in this is that the lawmakers, for the first time in my lifetime, revamped the state's Byzantine tax structure. I don't have to tell you all that we're talking about a very complex tax structure in which there are lots of exemptions and if this then that, and they're trying, they made an avenue for it, and that is going to be put out before the voters on October the 9th. And it's basically asking, do you want to remove this exemption, the federal tax deduction exemption, and then we'll use that money to lower franchise taxes, to lower the overall tax breaks. And so they came up with that. The other thing that they came up with is a centralization on the collection of sales taxes. And it goes back, back to Huey Long, where the locals just don't trust the state government with good reason, and they did not want to give up the ability to collect their own local sales taxes and give it to the state for fear that the state would take that money and spend it, on a basketball court in West Wego. And they just didn't want to do that. So they came together, and now there's going to be a panel with parish and municipal and state leadership on it that is going to work together to oversee the collection of state taxes. And that will put us like almost every other single state in the country. What we had to also, which has not been done in 40 years, think about that, is there's not been a recurring source of revenues for the highways, for bridges, for infrastructure that was in the state general fund. Now, this has not been signed yet, so this may not be happening. They took money from the federal government, and they put it in for a lot of bridge projects, but they also created, or they're going to divert motor vehicle taxes, which used to go into the state or will be going into the state general fund for years. And they're going to divert that to pay for roads and bridges and upkeep. And if he signs that, but there's a lot of problems with it, but he may sign it. The other thing is they decriminalized the possession of small amounts of marijuana. And you have to forgive me because I don't know my grams. You know, I was brought up in public schools. So it's about a half an ounce. So less than a half an ounce, where once they'd pack you off to jail, you would get a criminal record on your record, and now they'll give you a ticket that's not much more than $100. Now, some of the cities, Shreveport, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, already have this, but now it's going to be statewide. Part of the reason that they were able to get this was because there was a significant discussion over legalization of marijuana for recreational use. And I don't know about you, but I thought, well, we'll never see that in Louisiana. But it made it out of the Criminal Justice Committee. And it got close on the House floor. They ended up not doing it because they couldn't get the 53 votes, but they were like at 48 or 49. It was very close. All of the discussion about recreational use kind of opened the door for a bill that had to do with decriminalization, and they did not really talk about decriminalization that much, but it opened the door, and then all of a sudden it passed. Another important thing that kind of got lost and glazed over when we're looking at the fighting and stuff that went on was they passed a bill, it has been signed into law, that standardizes the conflicting parole rules for longtime felons. It used to be that if you committed, I don't know, like an armed robbery or something, your sentence was from now on. Back in the 90s, they said, well, if you have 30 years or more sentenced, you're over the age of 45 and you've served 20 of those years, then you're up for parole. And then they changed that. And then they changed it again. And then they changed it a fourth time. And so what you ended up having were people at Angola who were sentenced for a specific crime getting up for parole, while you had others sentenced at a different time who were not eligible for parole. So by standardizing, this was House Bill 145, by standardizing this, they were able to say, all right, and there's about 1,000 people that we're talking about will be eligible for parole under the same sort of rules. But they call it the 2045 rule. Something else that is important, and I didn't realize because I sent my kids to kindergarten, but we didn't have mandatory kindergarten. You didn't have to send your children to school until they were 7 years old. Well, now you're going to have to start sending your children at the age of 5, and they're going to have to go to kindergarten. And that's not a whole lot, but it's a major change in lifestyle. It gets the kids in there earlier. It gets them learning to read earlier. And the studies show that it's good for our children to start this education earlier. At the beginning of the session, it was all about pay raises. The teachers, they get $800 pay raise, $400 for school bus drivers, cafeteria workers, and other staffers. The university professors and staff are getting pay raises between 2% and 3%. It's not what they wanted. It's more than what Governor Edwards suggested, but it's less than what they wanted, and a compromise, I guess, is what we got. We're also moving towards elections with paper ballots, though that has not been signed yet. And I mean, given all of the states that had been fighting, particularly in the Deep South, that restricting voting rights, we were able to kind of, not we, but the legislative leadership was able to maneuver through that to kind of get to elections laws that are not nearly as draconian as was passed in Iowa, as was passed in Georgia, as they tried to pass in Texas. What we did end up with is increasing the number of early voting days during presidential elections from 7 to 11. And depending on whether the governor signs this other bill, there will be a movement in the voting machines towards paper ballots in the upcoming years. Wagering on sporting events. So that was signed into law yesterday. And if you're inclined to bet on LSU, you can ask Coach Ogeron when he comes. If you're inclined to vote on the Saints or basketball or baseball or any of that, you'll be able to do that. Hopefully by the beginning of football season, you'll be able to do that from using your phone, as you sit here, or because we voted for it, or while you're having dinner at a restaurant that serves alcohol, or at a bar, or at a kiosk at a Walk-Ons or somewhere like that. And they're hoping that this is going to raise a lot of money, though that's still up in the air. They've allotted $20 million of the proceeds to go towards early childhood development programs. The legislature had cut through that. They decided not to do early childhood funding, but then when they passed the sports betting bills, they included the $20 million, hopefully for that. And we continuing the earned income tax credit that helps the working poor through 2030. You may have heard that LSU is in the midst of a huge sexual misconduct scandal, and the legislature passed rules that basically makes stricter reporting requirements and comes up with punishments for those that don't follow the proper protocols. And higher education, while we're on the subject, has had draconian budget cuts, and at best standalone budgets since 2008. This year they get $100 million, which they'll get money for TOPS. There'll be money for scholarships for the low-income students that had not been getting much money for that. And then we have a new holiday, Juneteenth, the third Saturday, which was last Saturday, and it's to celebrate celebrate when the slaves learned of the Emancipation Proclamation in Texas, but it's now a nationwide holiday for us. And we got a new cultural song with Southern Nights by Alan Toussaint. And at the same time that they did this, that they also created You Are My Sunshine as the official state song. Back in the 70s, they had to try to get enough votes. They created it as an official state song. And so now it is the official state song. And the official state song, which, boy, it escapes me. And does anybody know it? I remember, I have written it about 24 times, but it was not catchy, and I don't remember it, and I didn't know it was a state song until I started writing about this. It's no longer the state song. You Are My Sunshine is a state song. And the biggest thing in my mind that came about is that you ended up with business and organized labor coming together over the problems that we're having with our unemployment system. They had kind of agreed on kind of shoring up the system, making sure that money got into what is the nearly empty unemployment trust fund that pays out benefits for people who have been laid off through no fault of their own and are looking for work. And we have among the lowest. I mean, I think, only Mississippi had a lower amount than we did. And the organized labor had been wanting to increase the weekly benefit for the unemployed for years. And so they came to an agreement on filling up the unemployment trust fund. There came an agreement on kind of shoring up a lot of the rules that goes around with the unemployment. And labor got a $28 permanent per week benefit increase. Then it sort of fell apart. And so they, on the last day, and I mean the last day, the last few hours, they were able to come up with a deal in which the governor would agree to leave the federal program that had been giving the unemployed $300 extra per week, and he would do it early. And and they basically came to an agreement, and it came down to, from my understanding, first off, the program is over on September the 6th. The governor had been looking at maybe August the 10th, maybe August the 15th to end that program in Louisiana. The Republicans wanted, they wanted early July, July 15th, and House Speaker Clay Scheck-Snyder came through and said, all right, let's just split the difference. And that was good enough. That was July 31st. He called it a good deal, so that unemployed will probably miss about 4 or 5, maybe 6 of those $300 additions. But come January, they get to $28. And that was interesting because when was the last time you saw Lobby and the AFL sitting together? And this was, okay, never is my answer. And maybe you all have a better idea. Yeah. So basically, we had about 959 bills filed for this session, maybe 1,000 more resolutions. The governor doesn't have to sign those, and they don't carry the same weight. He has signed 440 bills as of this morning. And what didn't pass is bills that failed to ban spanking in public schools or corporal punishment. There's not going to be any seatbelts on school buses. That didn't pass. The revamp of the teaching of American history and civics in the public school systems was, there was an effort to try to, it was a critical race theory effort to try to move the teaching towards that, towards removing critical race theory out of it. And that did not pass as well. And so, and there was also an effort that the school districts are trying to look at, how do we go to year-round schooling? And that didn't pass this time. And again, we didn't have the same sort of partisan, the Republicans nationally, not in Louisiana, not in the Gulf Coast, but nationally are on their back heels. And so after the January 6th insurrection, and they had been pushing in state houses across the nation bills that would energize their base. And that included the voting rights restrictions, the voting rights, that included the transgender restrictions that came out, and a number of those other bills, which we, with the exception of the transgender, which the leadership in the House and in the Senate and on the fourth floor kind of tamped down so that they would focus on the issues, the fiscal issues that we've just been talking about. But there was a lot of tension that came out through this session. We're going to see more of that. They were able to work it out this time, but we'll be able to see more of that when we get into redistricting, which is to redraw the districts from which these folks are elected from. And that's usually a bare knuckles fight. In the best of times, we'll see, this may be worse when we get, I guess in February is when they're talking about it. They haven't announced that yet. And so, I mean, I'm almost out of time, so let's ask some questions. Jim, what?
Various changes are being presented on tax code changes. Will they be presented as a single constitutional amendment, or are there multiple constitutional amendments?
Okay, there will be multiple constitutional amendments. I mean, on October 9th, we'll also be voting on several things like whether civil servants can have broader participation in political events. But there will be a constitutional amendment on the federal income tax deduction, which probably everybody in this room, including me, can take advantage of, but we're a small minority in this state and it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. So that is the key one. If that one does not pass, then the other lowering of they're linked, and the other lowering of tax brackets will not pass either. Also, constitutional amendment will be the centralization of sales tax collections.
Do you see any opposition organized to either one of them?
I haven't seen the opposition organized yet. And so, but there are going to be people that are opposed to it. Remember that, I mean, back in your day that they did away with the federal income tax deduction, and then brought it back. And that's what, 15, 20 years ago?
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for that wonderful summary of our legislative session. And I appreciate the optimism that you put forth in the presentation. As a pediatrician and firm believer in maternal and child health, I was trying to think of a grade I would give the session. For maternal health, I think I'd go with about a C-, and I'm being optimistic. And for child health, either a D+ or an F+, depending on the topic. So here's my question. I joked with a colleague of mine the other day saying, great work during a tough session. I'm about to go bet everything I have on LSU beating UCLA in the Rose Bowl. Along the way, I'm going to go buy as much recreational marijuana as possible so that our early childhood system of care can be fully funded. And as a pediatrician, I have a real problem with inhaling a substance that's going to increase my lifelong morbidity. So give me some reason to believe that our very cooperative, compromising legislative session can do more when they had more than they ever had. Can they do more in the future for maternal and child health?
Well, you'll have to tell me what the problem was. Why would you give them an F for maternal and child health?
Oh, we don't have enough time for that. Why would I give them a F? Well, no, I gave them a C- I think. What did I give them for maternal health?
C-.
Because they preserve Medicaid expansion for the health of mothers that can stay on Medicaid after their baby delivers for up to a year, which is a huge win for our citizenry. As far as the F+ in child care, the answer is between our ears, folks. This is where you invest everything you've got now in birth to 5, the health of the mom when she becomes pregnant till the time she delivers, and you won't need any prisons one day. So that's why I give them an F+ for not investing. We needed $86 million going into this session. We needed $86 million 2 sessions ago. This was the 3rd session in a row. We needed $86 million to shore up the Child Care Assistance to Families program, so every child in the state could benefit from a high-quality early childhood system of care.
And
it was a long answer.
And we got 20.
Yeah, and so can we
Well,
subtract and add here very well?
Well, yeah, and first off, it was their first step. This is the first time they've done this, so we'll see this into the future.
Absolutely.
I would hope so that we would
$20 million
allocated.
Yes, and that Bessie has finally put something in, and we are focusing the ball on the best investment, which is the maternal health of women before they become pregnant, such that they deliver a high-quality, full-term child who will benefit from kindergarten one day. Thank you for that summary.
When you mentioned that the money was already, kind of easy to do this year, they could focus on these other issues. How much of that money was due to some of these federal stimulus efforts that may not be reoccurring in the future? And how much of a hole in our budget might they have to face next year or the year after?
Okay, it's not as an easy answer. I mean, one reason that we had money this year is that the governor has imposed a discipline on spending and revenues, and was able to come in with a balanced budget this time. Then, because of the pandemic, we saw a massive increase in spending from consumers. And so the retail sales came in much higher than were expected. And also some income taxes were coming in higher than expected. But you're right, the main part was this huge influx of money from the federal government that was used to fill up various empty pots like unemployment that they otherwise would have had to take out of the state general fund to do so. And when I kind of set up a warning over the infrastructure deal in which they moved the motor vehicle taxes out of the general fund, they're going to do it slowly over several years, out of the state general fund and into the roads fund, if he vetoes that bill, he will do so because when it actually takes place, which is like 2025, 26 or so, that we're talking about a $300 million hole in the state general fund. At the same time, you remember that bump that we had back in 2016 and again in 2018, and that was, I can never get it right, but about a half a cent in our sales taxes to balance the budget. That rolls off at the same time. So that's another $400 million that'll roll off. And if he vetoes this infrastructure gimmick that they have, it'll be because he doesn't want to leave the next governor in 2 years with a $750 million hole. So we'll be getting a good amount of money next year, not so much the year after that. And they're looking to kind of do what they can and not add to recurring expenditures. That they don't want to give the money to bills that you have to pay year in and year out. So
do you believe they'll be able to convene an override session, and will they do it?
Well, this is a big argument here. Okay, first off, they have not ever come back for an override session. Well, in modern times, they may have done it back in 1817 or something like that, but they have never come back for an override session. The only overrides that have happened, and there are two, was while they were still in session, Buddy Roemer and the abortion bill, and Edwin Edwards, and I think he even asked for it because he realized there was a mistake in one of the bills that he passed today. And so that went, so then the question is, will they return for transgender or maybe infrastructure if he vetoes that bill? And the question there is, I don't think so. That is my own personal gut feeling, and I'm not a wealthy person, so I can tell you how well I prognosticate the future. But the reasons why is that for transgender, the governor began the year before they even filed the bill saying that he would veto a bill that restricted transgender youth from participating in public school sports. And that gave a lot of the legislators cover to go ahead and avoid having, trolls call them up and they have to deal with it. So they, fine, I'll do that. But now they would have to vote on it. And in addition to the transgender vote, they will have to vote on embarrassing the governor. And you're going to need 70 people in the House, and you're going to need 26 senators to do that. And I just don't think the numbers work out to an override session, despite what the House Speaker sent out in his email last night.
It was very possible.
Well, he said it was possible, but the other thing is that he also had wiggle out. I can't do it myself, he says, but if we do it, that I would vote against it. Well, he's the House Speaker, and he could probably push enough of them to vote on that. So we got.
You alluded to racial tension in the legislature, and I think most of us were very based on what we've seen in the press. And a lot of that came from Representative Garofalo's position relative to the bill that he was pushing. It seemed like that was a relatively simplistic view of that. Was there something else going on below the surface that we didn't see with respect to where all that tension came from?
Well, yeah, there was a fight throughout the session dealing with police and law enforcement and what their rules ought to be in when they address or confront people on the streets. There was also this issue of the critical race theory, which is it's an academic discussion about what the impact of race has been on the American system and what the laws and that sort of thing. And it's been out there since the 1970s, but President Trump made an issue out of it. And as you can see, there's also an issue that may split up the Southern Baptist Church over this thing. And so all of that was going on. Garofalo was the lightning rod of that. And while what he said, he almost immediately tried to backtrack it. But when he went to the well to apologize for what he said, it was a rather belligerent apology, and that just served to anger a lot of people. And what happened was that you ended up with the Democrats and the Black Caucus saying, we're not, and a number of Republicans saying, we're not going to vote on some of these fiscal measures that you want to take. And you needed to have 2/3 votes, 70 votes out of 105 in the House. And they shot across the bow a couple of times. There were arguments. Even the state song was became kind of a tense sort of racial animosity. So yeah, it was there. It was palpable. It was seeable. Yeah.